The glass tower of Blackwood Dynamics rose above Manhattan like a monument to ambition. 63 floors of steel and innovation catching the morning sun until it blazed like a pillar of fire against the gray November sky. From the street below, tourists craned their necks and pointed. Somewhere inside that tower, they whispered, sat one of the most powerful women in America. They were right. On the 59th floor, behind walls of tinted glass that revealed nothing to the outside world, Evelyn Blackwood stood at her window and watched the city wake. She was 34 years old. Blonde hair fell in careful waves over shoulders draped in charcoal wool. Her eyes held the color of a winter sky just before snow, pale blue, and utterly still. She had built this empire from nothing. A small tech startup in her garage at 22, her first million at 25, her first billion at 31. The business magazines called her the Ice Queen of Manhattan. They meant it as a compliment. Evelyn had learned long ago that warmth was a luxury leaders could not afford. Emotions were weapons that others would use against you. Vulnerability was a door left unlocked in a dangerous neighborhood. So she had built her walls high and her defenses deep. She had made herself untouchable. But every fortress has its crack, and hers was waiting in the lobby 60 floors below. The elevator descended in silence. Evelyn checked her reflection in the polished steel doors. Perfect posture, perfect composure, not a hair out of place. The doors opened with a soft chime, and she stepped into the marble lobby where morning light streamed through three-story windows. He was sitting on the leather bench near the fountain, a small figure with light brown hair that caught gold in the sunlight, blue eyes that carried an ancient sadness no child should ever know. Miles was 8 years old. He had never spoken a single word. Evelyn's heart did what it always did when she saw her son. It cracked open just a little, just enough to let the pain seep through before she sealed it shut again. She crossed the lobby with measured steps, her heels clicking precise rhythms against the marble floor. Employees moved out of her way without being asked. They always did. Miles looked up when her shadow fell across him. His eyes brightened. Just a fraction. Just enough to break her heart all over again. She knelt before him, careless of her designer suit, and took his small hands in hers. His fingers were cold. They were always cold, as if the silence that trapped him had stolen his warmth along with his voice. "Good morning," she signed, with practiced hands. "Ready for the day?" Miles nodded. His smile was small and fleeting, a bird that landed briefly before taking flight. He reached for her hand, and together they walked toward the private elevator that would take them to her office, where he would sit in the corner with his books in his silence while she ran an empire. This was their routine. This was their life. And Evelyn had long ago stopped believing it would ever change. The diagnosis had come when Miles was 6 months old. She remembered that day with the clarity of a wound that never healed. The sterile office, the charts on the wall, the specialist who could not quite meet her eyes as he delivered the verdict. Profound congenital deafness, total inability to produce vocal sound. She had not cried then. She had asked questions, demanded options, insisted on second opinions, third opinions, fourth opinions. She had dragged her infant son from one medical center to another, from specialists in Boston to researchers in Los Angeles, from experimental clinics in Switzerland to acoustic laboratories in Japan. Nothing worked. The verdict was always the same. Miles existed in a world of absolute silence. His vocal cords, his auditory system, his entire mechanism for creating and receiving sound was simply absent. A fluke of genetics, a cruel twist of fate, an unanswered prayer that someone somewhere had gotten terribly wrong. And so the whispers had begun. She heard them in the hallways of her own company, in the society galas she was obligated to attend, in the carefully worded sympathy of people who did not understand that their pity was worse than any insult. Poor Evelyn. Such a successful woman, but her son. Well, she made herself deaf to those whispers just as surely as her son was deaf to everything else. But the worst betrayal had not come from strangers. Graham Whitmore had been her husband for 3 years. Miles's father. A man she thought she loved until the night he sat across from her at their dining table and said the words that ended their marriage. "Have you considered institutionalizing him?" She could still feel the ice that had spread through her veins, the precise moment when love transformed into something else entirely. "He is our son," she had said. "He is broken," Graham had replied, "and he is breaking you too." There are facilities that can give him proper care. Give us our lives back. Evelyn had filed for divorce the next morning. Some betrayals cannot be forgiven, so she carried on alone. A CEO by day, a heartbroken mother every moment in between. She gave Miles everything she could. The best tutors, the finest therapists, every adaptive technology money could buy. She learned sign language until her hands could speak as fluently as her voice. She rearranged her entire life around a small boy who could not hear her say she loved him. And still, every night when she watched him sleep, she wondered if it was enough. If she was enough. If there was something more she should be doing, stone she had left unturned, some answer hiding just beyond her reach. Nearly a decade of wondering. All those years of silence. A mother's love pouring into a void that gave back nothing but echoes. Theodore Callahan had learned how to be invisible. It was a skill like any other, a craft that could be mastered with practice. You kept your head down. You moved with quiet efficiency. You wore the uniform of the unremarkable until people looked right through you as if you were made of glass. Theo was 36 years old. He had broad shoulders that came from years of physical labor, hands that knew the weight of mops and brooms and trash bags, and eyes the color of warm coffee that crinkled at the corners when he smiled, which was not often anymore. He pushed his cleaning cart through the gleaming corridors of Blackwood Dynamics, invisible among the suits and the ambition and the expensive cologne. Nobody noticed him. That was the point. But Theodore Callahan had not always been invisible. 10 years ago, he had been Dr. Theodore Callahan. The name had appeared in journals, in research papers, in the acknowledgments of books that changed how the world understood sound. He had been an acoustic engineer, one of the best in his field, specializing in vibration-assisted devices for children who could not hear. He had spent years developing technology that could let deaf children feel music through their bones, sense speech through vibrations, connect to a world of sound in ways that did not require working ears. He had done this work alongside his wife, Lillian. Even now, 10 years later, her name moved through him like a melody he could not forget. Lillian, with her dark curls and her brilliant mind and her absolute conviction that they could change the world. Lillian, who believed that sound was not just something you heard, but something you felt, something that lived in the bones and the blood and the beating heart. They were going to revolutionize acoustic therapy. They were going to give voices to the voiceless. And then came the night that ended everything. A drunk driver, a rainy intersection, a collision of metal and flesh that lasted less than 3 seconds and destroyed 2 lives. Lillian died on the operating table at 11:47 p.m. on a Thursday in March. Theo had walked out of the hospital at dawn and never went back to his laboratory. The equations reminded him too much of her voice explaining them. The research felt haunted by her dreams. The work they had built together became unbearable because she was supposed to be there laughing at his mistakes, celebrating his breakthroughs, making every discovery worth discovering. He had sold his patents, resigned his position, taken a job where his hands could stay busy and his heart could stay numb. A janitor. No one expected brilliance from a janitor. No one expected anything at all. And that suited Theodore Callahan just fine. But he had not disappeared entirely. There was one light that still pulled him forward. One reason he got up every morning and remembered how to breathe. Rosalie was 7 years old. She had her mother's dark curls and her father's warm eyes, and an absolutely unstoppable spirit that seemed determined to drag joy out of even the darkest corners of the world. She noticed things. She always had. When someone was sad, she knew. When someone needed kindness, she provided it. She had Lillian's gift for seeing what others missed. She was the reason Theo had not followed his wife into that darkness. She was everything. And today, on a gray November morning, she had insisted on coming to work with him because her school was closed for a teacher training day and she wanted to see where Daddy worked. Theo had agreed because he could not say no to her. He should have known better. The lobby of Blackwood Dynamics was busy with the morning rush when it happened. Executives hurried toward elevators. Security guards checked badges. Phones rang and coffee steamed, and voices overlapped in the endless soundtrack of corporate ambition. Rosalie wandered ahead of her father, her dark curls bouncing as she explored. And then she stopped. A boy was sitting alone on a leather bench near the fountain. He was small, perhaps her age or a little older, with hair the color of autumn leaves and eyes that looked like they had never known anything but loneliness. He was not playing with anything, not looking at anyone, just sitting in perfect stillness as if he were a photograph of a child rather than a living, breathing boy. Rosalie did not hesitate. She walked right up to him, planted herself on the bench beside him, and began to talk. About her school, about her favorite color, about the dream she had last night with flying elephants and a talking moon. The boy did not respond. He did not even look at her. Most children would have been confused, offended, would have huffed away to find someone more receptive. Rosalie simply stopped talking. And then she did something that made Theo's breath catch in his throat. She reached over and took the boy's hand in hers, not demanding attention, not asking for anything, just offering presence, just saying without words, "I am here." The boy's head turned slowly, his eyes met hers, and something extraordinary happened. He smiled. It was small, hesitant, like a flower opening after a long winter. But it was real and it transformed his face in early, and Rosalie smiled back as if this silent connection was the most natural thing in the world. Theo watched from 20 feet away, his hands frozen on his cleaning cart, something tight and painful moving through his chest. He knew that look. He had seen it on the faces of the children he used to work with, the ones who could not hear, the ones who lived in their own quiet universes, desperate for someone to reach across the silence. Before he could move, before he could think, a woman appeared. She was tall and blonde and impeccably dressed in a suit that probably cost more than Theo made in a month. Her heels clicked against the marble with the precision of a metronome. Her face was composed, controlled, revealing nothing. But her eyes when they fell on the boy, and Rosalie's joined hands held something that looked almost like grief. She spoke to the boy in sign language, her fingers moving with practiced grace. The boy nodded and stood, letting go of Rosalie's hand with obvious reluctance. The woman took his hand instead and began to lead him away, barely glancing at the little girl who had given her son something no amount of money could buy. But she paused, just for a moment, and she looked back at Rosalie with an expression Theo could not read. Gratitude, perhaps, or pain, or both. Then she was gone, swallowed by the private elevator, taking the silent boy with her. Theo looked at his daughter. Rosalie was staring after them with a small frown creasing her forehead. "Daddy, why doesn't that boy talk?" Theo knelt beside her, his janitor's uniform making him small, making him safe. "Some people can't hear or speak, sweetheart." Rosalie considered this with the profound seriousness only children possess. "That's okay," she declared. "We're friends anyway." And she skipped off to explore more of the lobby, leaving Theo with a heart that felt simultaneously lighter and heavier than it had in years. He did not know the woman's name. He did not know the boy's story. But something about that brief encounter stayed with him for the rest of the day. Something about the mother's carefully hidden desperation. Something about the child's isolation in the midst of hundreds of people. Something about Rosalie's simple, profound gift of presence. That night, after he had tucked Rosalie into bed and kissed her forehead and told her that her mother would be proud of her kindness, Theo sat alone in his small apartment and thought about the work he had abandoned, the children he had stopped helping, the silence he had chosen instead of facing his grief. He thought about Lillian, who would have marched right up to that boy and figured out some way to reach him, who never met a problem she could not solve, a child she could not help, a darkness she could not illuminate. "What would you do?" he asked the empty room. The answer came not in words, but in the memory of her voice. "You would find a way. You always do." But Theo was not sure he believed that anymore. The incident happened on a Tuesday. The sky had turned gray and heavy, pressing down on Manhattan like a wet blanket. Raindrops streaked the windows of Blackwood Dynamics, blurring the city into an impressionist painting. On the 17th floor, construction crews were completing renovations that had been ongoing for months. Evelyn had a meeting with her board of directors at 3 o'clock. Miles would wait in her office, as he always did, surrounded by books and drawing supplies, sealed inside his bubble of silence, while his mother commanded armies. But first she needed to review the progress on 17. She took Miles with her because she could not bear to leave him alone any longer than necessary. His small hand fit perfectly inside hers, a warmth she clung to even as she maintained her professional composure. The construction zone was loud. Drills screamed, hammers pounded, workers shouted over the din. Evelyn felt Miles shrink against her, his body responding to vibrations even if his ears registered nothing. She signed an apology to him. She promised it would be quick. They were walking down the corridor toward the project manager's makeshift office when it happened. A massive electronic display board was being moved from one end of the floor to the other. It weighed several hundred pounds and required 4 workers to manage. Something went wrong. A grip slipped. A balance shifted. The board fell. It struck the floor with a sound like the world cracking open. A thunderclap of metal and glass that shook the entire building. Workers shouted. Alarms began to wail. Dust rose in clouds, and Miles collapsed. One moment he was standing beside his mother. The next he was on his knees, both hands pressed against his ears, his face contorted in an expression of absolute agony. His mouth was open. His body was rigid. He looked like he was screaming, but no sound came out. For most of his life, he had lived in silence, and now he was drowning in pain that had no voice. Evelyn was on the floor beside him. In an instant, her board meeting, forgotten, her professional composure shattered. She pulled him against her chest, shouting for help, demanding someone call a doctor. Her voice cracking with a terror she had not felt since the day she learned her son would never hear. Miles was shaking, tears streamed down his face, his hands clawed at his ears as if trying to tear something out, something invisible, something that was hurting him in ways she could not understand. This made no sense. He was deaf. He could not hear the crash. He should not be reacting to sound at all. Unless. 20 feet away, Theodore Callahan had been cleaning an office when the board fell. His head snapped up at the impact, his body instinctively cataloging the acoustics, the reverberations, the frequency patterns, the way sound moved through the building structure. And then he heard something else. Beneath the chaos of alarms and shouting, beneath the settling echoes of the crash, there was another sound, high-pitched, oscillating, a frequency that should not exist in this environment. It sounded like a malfunctioning vibration device. Theo's blood went cold. He knew that sound. He had heard it in his laboratory years ago during testing when devices went wrong. It was the signature of old technology, discontinued technology, equipment that had been pulled from the market a decade ago because of unstable frequency modulation. But that was impossible. Why would that sound be here? His trained ear followed the frequency as he moved toward the commotion. People had gathered at a distance, uncertain, afraid. The CEO was on the floor with her son. Her Ice Queen composure completely shattered, her voice breaking as she tried to soothe a child who could not hear her. The sound was coming from the boy, specifically from his right ear. Theo's heart began to pound. A decade of buried knowledge surged to the surface. The frequency patterns, the oscillation rates, the specific harmonic signature of a vibration device in catastrophic failure. Something was lodged in that child's ear canal, something that had been there for a very long time, something that every specialist for all those years had somehow missed. He made a decision. Later, he would wonder what possessed him. A janitor pushing through the crowd of executives and security guards, approaching the most powerful woman in the building. A nobody daring to interrupt a mother's crisis. But in that moment, all he could think about was Lillian, about the children they had tried to save, about the ones they had actually helped. He knelt beside Evelyn Blackwood and spoke in a voice low enough that only she could hear. "Miss Blackwood, I need you to listen to me carefully. There's a device lodged in your son's ear, a vibration device, old technology. It's creating interference. I believe I can remove it safely, but I need your permission." Evelyn stared at him as if he had spoken in an alien language. A janitor, in a maintenance uniform, claiming to know something that years of expensive specialists had missed. It was absurd. It was impossible. But Miles let out another silent scream, his body going rigid in her arms, and desperation made its own logic. She gave a single sharp nod. Theo's hands were steady as he reached for the small LED pen light he always carried, an old habit from his research days. He gently tilted Miles's head, his voice soft and calm as he spoke to the boy. "I know it hurts, buddy. I'm going to help you. Just stay very still for me." Miles could not hear the words, but somehow he understood. His terrified eyes locked onto Theo's calm ones, and something in that gaze seemed to quiet the panic. Not completely, but enough. Theo directed the light into the boy's ear canal, carefully, precisely, the way he had done hundreds of times in his laboratory, examining the ears of children who would never hear without help. And there it was, lodged deep invisible to casual examination, but unmistakable to someone who knew what to look for. A small silicone ring embedded with a vibration generator. Theo recognized it immediately. It was an early model designed for bone conduction stimulation. The kind of device that had shown promise before its fundamental flaws became apparent, before the recalls, before the lawsuits, before the technology was banned entirely. Someone had put this in the boy's ear, years ago from the look of it, and it had been failing ever since, creating interference, generating frequencies that would block any residual hearing, causing pain that no one could see because the child had no way to express it. This boy had not been living in silence. He had been living in noise, constant, invisible, agonizing noise that had been torturing him for years, while everyone around him assumed he simply could not hear. Theo's hands trembled for just a moment. Then he steadied himself and reached for the device. It came free smoothly, a tiny piece of silicone and metal that had stolen years from a child's life, that had imprisoned him in artificial silence while real silence might have been bearable, that had caused immeasurable suffering while everyone around him believed he felt nothing at all. The moment the device cleared Miles's ear, the boy gasped. His body went slack. The tension drained out of him like water from a broken vessel. He blinked rapidly, his face transforming from agony to confusion to something that looked almost like wonder. The pain was gone. The noise was gone. For the first time in years, perhaps for the first time ever, his ear was simply quiet. Evelyn stared at the small object in Theo's palm. Her face had gone absolutely white. "What is that?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "It's a bone conduction vibration device," Theo explained quietly. "Old technology discontinued about 10 years ago because the devices were unstable. This one malfunctioned. It's been creating interference that would have blocked any residual hearing your son might have had. It would have caused significant discomfort, maybe even pain." He met her eyes. "I'm sorry. No child should have endured this." Evelyn looked from the device to her son. Miles was breathing normally now. His eyes were clearer than she had seen them in years. He was looking around with an expression she had never witnessed before. Alert, present, as if a fog had lifted from his entire existence. She looked back at Theo, and the tears came. All those years, since the diagnosis, she had believed her son was trapped in permanent silence. She had blamed fate or God or her own inadequate love. Specialists and treatments and therapies that never worked because they were treating a condition that did not exist. The answer had been a tiny piece of broken machinery, lodged in her son's ear, invisible to everyone who should have found it, discovered in 30 seconds by a janitor. Evelyn pulled Miles against her chest and wept. Great heaving sobs that had been locked inside her since that first diagnosis, since the divorce, since every night she had watched her son sleep and wondered if she was failing him. She did not care who saw her break. The Ice Queen of Manhattan was melting in the middle of a construction zone, holding her son crying into his hair, while employees watched from a distance and did not know what to do. Miles, for his part, seemed confused by his mother's tears, but he wrapped his small arms around her neck and held on tight. And somewhere deep in his chest, in a place that had been silent for most of his life, something stirred. A feeling without a name. A door beginning to open. Later, after the chaos had subsided, after Miles had been examined by the company physician and pronounced physically unharmed, after the crowd had dispersed and the construction crews had returned to work, Evelyn found herself standing in a storage room. Theo was there putting away his supplies. His back was to her. His hands moved with quiet efficiency, the janitor's uniform making him invisible once again. She stood in the doorway and watched him for a long moment. "How did you know?" Theo paused. Then he turned to face her. For a long moment, he seemed to be deciding something, weighing how much truth to offer this woman who was a stranger, this CEO who existed in a different universe than janitors. Then he told her, "I was an acoustic engineer once. My wife and I worked on vibration-assisted hearing devices. We wanted to help children like your son." He paused. "She died 10 years ago. I left that life behind, but I never forgot the work." Evelyn absorbed this. "You saved my son." Theo shook his head. "I just removed a piece of broken equipment." She stepped closer, her voice fierce now, cutting through the exhaustion and the tears. You gave him a chance nobody else saw. Theo met her eyes. You don't need to repay me. Just take care of him. That's enough. But it was not enough for Evelyn, not nearly enough. That night, alone in her penthouse apartment, she had the device analyzed by a private laboratory. The results arrived at midnight. She read them, sitting on the edge of Miles's bed, watching her son sleep peacefully for the first time in her memory. The device had been purchased from an unregulated market. When Miles was just 6 months old, it had been intended for pediatric use but had never been approved, never been tested properly, never been safe, and it had been implanted by Miles's previous nanny, a woman named Constance Whitfield. Evelyn remembered her, a gentle, well-meaning woman who had worked for them when Miles was an infant. She had claimed to know about hearing assistance, had offered to help, had seemed so sincere, and she had put an untested, unstable device in a baby's ear, without medical supervision, without proper training, without any understanding of what she was doing. The device had slipped deeper over time, had become invisible to the cursory examinations of specialists who were not looking for something that should not exist, had degraded slowly its frequency, oscillations growing more unstable, creating an environment of acoustic chaos inside Miles's ear. He had not been deaf, he had been artificially deafened, by good intentions, by ignorance, by a tiny piece of technology that should never have existed. Evelyn sat in the darkness of her son's room and felt a door inside her begin to open. The guilt was there. It would always be there. She had trusted the wrong people. She had been so busy building an empire that she had missed the torture device lodged in her own child's ear. But beneath the guilt, there was something else. Hope. The specialist said Miles might have residual hearing capacity. The device had not caused permanent damage. With proper therapy, proper support, proper intervention, he might be able to develop both hearing and speech. Might. The word burned in the darkness like a distant star. Uncertain, but real. Evelyn reached out and brushed the hair from her son's forehead. He stirred slightly but did not wake. His face was peaceful, untroubled, as if the nightmare of the past years had already begun to fade. She whispered a promise into the darkness. I will find a way. I will not fail you again. And somewhere across the city in a small apartment that smelled of floor cleaner and old memories, Theodore Callahan sat by his daughter's bed and watched her sleep. Rosalie had asked about the boy again, the one who did not talk. Theo had told her the truth or part of it, that the boy had been hurt, that someone had helped him today, that maybe if they were lucky things would be better for him now. Rosalie had smiled that knowing smile of hers. I knew someone would help him, she had said, and she had fallen asleep with her mother's face smiling down from the photograph on her nightstand. Theo looked at that photograph now. Lillian frozen in time, forever young, forever brilliant, forever gone. I helped someone today, he told her quietly. It's been a long time since I did that. It felt good. The photograph did not answer, but somewhere in the silence of the apartment, Theo could almost hear her voice. It's a start, and for the first time in 10 years, Theodore Callahan allowed himself to believe that maybe she was right. The laboratory results arrived 3 days after the incident. Evelyn sat in her corner office, the Manhattan skyline sprawling behind her like a kingdom she no longer cared about. The report was 17 pages long, filled with technical language and clinical observations. But the conclusion fit into a single sentence that would haunt her for the rest of her life. Subject demonstrates significant bone conduction hearing capacity. Condition is not congenital deafness, but acquired acoustic interference caused by foreign device. She read that sentence 7 times. Each time it cut a little deeper. Miles was not deaf. He had never been deaf. For most of his life, she had accepted a diagnosis that was fundamentally wrong. She had mourned a son who was not lost. Specialists had examined him and tested him and declared him beyond help, and not one of them had thought to look for a tiny piece of malfunctioning technology lodged in his ear canal. And neither had she. That was the part that destroyed her. She was Evelyn Blackwood. She had built an empire on the principle of questioning everything. She had made her fortune by refusing to accept answers that did not satisfy her. She challenged assumptions. She demanded proof. She never ever took anything at face value, except when it came to her son. When it came to Miles, she had trusted the experts. She had believed the diagnoses. She had accepted the prognosis because the alternative was too painful to consider. Hope was a dangerous thing when you were already drowning in grief. So she had stopped hoping, and her son had suffered for it. The guilt settled into her bones like a winter that would never end. She had failed him, not through malice, not through neglect, but through the simple, devastating act of giving up. She had given up on her own child, and a janitor had not. The knock on her door startled her. Her assistant appeared apologetic, explaining that Mr. Callahan was here, the maintenance worker. He had requested a moment of her time. Evelyn looked up from the report. "Send him in." Theo entered her office like a man walking into a cathedral. His eyes moved across the expensive furniture, the original artwork, the view that most people would never see in their entire lives. He was wearing his janitor's uniform. He had not changed, had not tried to make himself presentable for the CEO. She respected that. She gestured to the chair across from her desk. He sat. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched between them, filled with everything that had happened and everything that was yet to come. "How is he?" Theo asked finally. "The boy." Evelyn's composure cracked just a little. "The report says he can hear, through bone conduction. He was never actually deaf." Her voice caught. "All those years of silence were caused by a broken device that I should have found myself." Theo leaned forward slightly. "It wasn't your fault." She shook her head. "I'm his mother. It's exactly my fault." Theo was quiet for a moment. Then he spoke again, his voice gentle but firm. "Guilt is a luxury you can't afford right now. Your son needs you present, not paralyzed by what should have been. There's a window here, a chance, but it won't stay open forever. Miles lost years he'll never get back. We can't change that, but we can give him what comes next." Evelyn looked at this man, this janitor, this stranger who spoke with the authority of someone who understood exactly what she was feeling. "How do you know?" she asked. "How do you know what this feels like?" Theo's eyes flickered to the window, to the city beyond, to something she could not see. "I lost someone once. I spent years drowning in what I should have done differently. It nearly destroyed me." He paused. "The dead don't need our guilt, but the living need our love." The words settled between them like something sacred. Evelyn made a decision. "I want to hire you." Theo's eyebrows rose. "I want you to work with Miles," she continued, "to help him learn to hear, to use whatever knowledge you still have from your research days to give my son a chance." Theo was already shaking his head. "I'm not that man anymore. It's been 10 years. The field has moved on without me." Evelyn leaned forward. "I don't care about the field. I care about my son. Every specialist in the country missed what you found in 30 seconds. Don't tell me you're not qualified." Theo looked at her for a long moment. "What about your board of directors? They're not going to approve a janitor running a therapy program." Evelyn's expression hardened. "I'll handle the board." The emergency meeting was called for Friday afternoon. Senator Douglas Pemberton sat at the head of the conference table, his silver hair perfectly styled, his suit worth more than most people's cars. He had been chairman of the board for 7 years. He had never liked taking orders from a woman half his age, and he liked even less the direction Evelyn had been taking the company lately. The other board members arranged themselves around the table like soldiers preparing for battle. They had all read the memo. They all knew what was coming. Evelyn entered last, as she always did. She took her seat at the opposite end of the table from Pemberton. The full length of polished mahogany stretched between them like a battlefield. Pemberton spoke first. "I've reviewed your proposal." His voice dripped with barely concealed disdain. "It's irregular, unprecedented. I question whether company resources should be allocated to what is essentially a personal project." Evelyn let him finish. Then she straightened in her chair. "I'm not asking for permission." The room went cold. Pemberton's eyes narrowed. "You're proposing to create a new research division, to fund it with company money, to staff it with a maintenance worker who has no credentials, no recent publications, no standing in the scientific community." He spread his hands. "It sounds like emotion clouding judgment." Evelyn's response came without hesitation. "Theodore Callahan is currently employed as a janitor. He is also Dr. Theodore Callahan, formerly of the Whitmore Institute for Acoustic Research. His work on vibration-assisted hearing devices has been cited in over 200 peer-reviewed papers. His patents generated $17 million in licensing fees before he left the field." She paused to let that sink in. This man in 30 seconds found what years of specialists missed. Would anyone like to question his qualifications to his face? Pemberton opened his mouth. Evelyn cut him off. This is my company. I built it. I grew it. I made every person in this room wealthy beyond their wildest dreams. I'm not asking for a vote. I'm informing you of a decision. The room was silent. Pemberton's face had turned an interesting shade of red. But he said nothing. The motion passed. The therapy room was set up in a converted conference space on the 42nd floor. Theo had requested minimal furniture, maximum open space. Surfaces of different materials arranged throughout the room, wood and metal and glass and fabric. Each surface had different acoustic properties. Each would vibrate differently when struck. Miles stood in the center of the room looking lost. He had never been in a space designed specifically for him. His entire life had been spent adapting to a world that did not accommodate his needs. Now he was surrounded by objects whose only purpose was to help him. He did not know what to do with that. Theo knelt in front of him, bringing himself to the boy's eye level. He did not sign. He did not write notes. He simply held out his hand, palm up, and waited. Miles looked at the hand, then at Theo's face, then back at the hand. Slowly, hesitantly, he placed his small palm against Theo's larger one. Theo smiled. He pressed his other hand against his own chest and hummed, a low, resonant sound that Miles could not hear but could feel through the bones of their connected hands. Miles's eyes widened. Vibration. He could feel the vibration. Theo hummed again, higher this time. The vibration changed, became faster, more intense, then lower, slower, each pitch creating its own distinct sensation. Miles was transfixed. For the first time in his life, he understood that sound was not something that happened in the air. It was something that happened in the body, in the bones, in the very structure of physical matter. Sound was touch, and he could feel it. The sessions began daily after that. Theo started with the basics. He taught Miles to place his hands on different surfaces while he spoke, while he clapped, while he played recordings of different frequencies. He showed the boy how wood vibrated differently than metal, how glass carried high frequencies better than fabric, how the human chest resonated with the lowest tones. Miles absorbed everything. He was hungry for this knowledge in a way that broke Evelyn's heart to witness. He had spent most of his life locked out of a world that everyone else took for granted. Now he was being given a key, and he was desperate to use it. Rosalie came to the sessions whenever her schedule allowed. She had appointed herself Miles's unofficial assistant. She would sit beside him and talk, letting him feel the vibrations of her voice through their joined hands. She explained things to him in 7-year-old terms. She made up games that incorporated the concepts Theo was teaching. She gave him something no therapy could provide: friendship. Real, uncomplicated, unconditional friendship. Evelyn watched from behind the observation window, her heart simultaneously breaking and healing as her son learned to feel the world for the first time. Progress was slow but steady. Within a month, Miles could differentiate between high and low frequencies through touch alone. He could feel the rhythm of music through vibration boards. He could sense when someone was speaking near him by the subtle changes in the air. But he still had not made a sound. His voice remained locked inside him, a prisoner of years of silence. Theo was patient. "Voice will come last," he told Evelyn. "He needs to understand sound before he can create it. We're building a foundation brick by brick. The structure can't be rushed." Evelyn tried to be patient too, but every night when she kissed her son goodnight and watched him fall asleep in silence, she wondered if the foundation would ever be finished, if the structure would ever rise, if she would ever hear her son say the words she longed for more than anything. Mom. Just once. Just to know it was possible. The breakthrough came on an ordinary Wednesday. Rosalie was telling Miles a story about her imaginary friend, a purple dragon named Thunderbolt who was afraid of butterflies. She was animated, gesturing wildly, her voice rising and falling with dramatic flair. Miles had his hand pressed against her shoulder, feeling the vibrations of her voice. And then something happened. Rosalie said something funny, something about Thunderbolt hiding behind a cloud from a particularly aggressive butterfly. And Miles laughed. It was not a silent laugh. It was sound. Raw, unformed, more of a bark than a giggle. But it was unmistakably a vocalization. Air pushed through vocal cords. Vibration created by his own body. The first sound Miles had made in his entire life. Rosalie stopped mid-sentence. Theo froze. Evelyn, watching from behind the glass, pressed both hands over her mouth, her breath catching in her throat. Miles looked confused. He had felt something strange in his throat, a buzzing, a vibration that was different from anything he had experienced before. He reached up and touched his neck, his eyes wide with wonder. Theo moved quickly but calmly. He took Miles's hand and placed it against his own throat. Then he laughed deliberately, letting the boy feel the vibrations. Through gestures, he explained what had happened. That Miles had just made this sound, that his throat had just done this thing, that the vibration came from inside him. Miles stared at him. Then he looked at Rosalie. Then he touched his own throat again. And he tried. The sound that came out was garbled, strange, nothing like a laugh. But it was a sound, a real sound, created intentionally by a boy who had never known he could create anything at all. Miles's face transformed. Wonder, pure radiant wonder. He tried again and again. Each attempt different, each sound new, each vibration a discovery. Evelyn burst through the observation room door. She ran to her son and dropped to her knees in front of him, reaching for him, but afraid to touch, afraid to break the spell. Miles looked at his mother, and he made a sound. For her, on purpose. It was not a word, it was not even close to a word. But it was a gift offered freely by a son who had finally found something he could give. Evelyn pulled him into her arms and held him until neither of them could breathe. The setback came 3 weeks later. It arrived without warning on an afternoon when the sky had turned dark and rain was pounding against the windows like fists demanding entry. Miles had been making remarkable progress. He could produce several distinct vowel sounds. He was beginning to understand the relationship between mouth shape and sound. He was learning to feel his own voice through the bones of his skull. Then the storm hit. Thunder cracked across Manhattan like the sky was splitting in two, and Miles collapsed. He fell to the floor of the therapy room with his hands pressed against his ears, his body convulsing, his face twisted in terror. It was exactly like the incident with the display board, except there was no device in his ear anymore. There was nothing to remove, nothing to fix, just a boy overwhelmed by a world that was suddenly terrifyingly loud. Evelyn rushed to him, but he pushed her away. He scrambled backward until he hit the wall. His eyes welled, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He looked at his mother as if she were a stranger, as if everything familiar had become threatening. Theo was there in seconds. He did not approach Miles. Instead, he sat down on the floor 10 feet away and began to knock on the wooden surface beside him. A steady rhythm, predictable, calm. Knock, knock, knock. Miles's wild eyes found him. Knock, knock, knock. The rhythm continued, unchanging, reliable. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, Miles's breathing began to slow. Knock, knock, knock. Thunder rolled outside, but the rhythm inside was constant. Knock, knock, knock. Miles's hands lowered from his ears. He crawled forward toward Theo, toward the sound that made sense in a world that had become chaos. He reached out and touched the floor, and he felt it, the rhythm, steady, safe, predictable. Theo began to speak, his voice low and calm, his hands still knocking that steady beat. Sound can be scary. The world is loud, and sometimes it's too loud. But you're going to learn to live in that world. We'll take it step by step. He met Miles's eyes. Right now, we're just going to feel the rhythm. Knock, knock, knock. Miles pressed his palm flat against the floor, and gradually, hesitantly, he began to knock too. His rhythm was unsteady at first, ragged. But Theo adjusted, matching the boy's tempo, creating a conversation in percussion. Two people speaking without words, finding each other in the storm. Evelyn watched from the doorway, understanding something she had not grasped before. She had thought the device was the enemy. She had thought removing it would solve everything. But the truth was more complicated than that. Miles had spent most of his life in artificial chaos. His brain had never learned to process sound normally. The device was gone, but its damage remained. Every loud noise was an assault. Every unexpected sound was a threat. The world that everyone else navigated unconsciously was for Miles a minefield of overwhelming sensation. The journey was not over. It was only beginning. That night, after Miles had finally fallen asleep, Evelyn sat in her home office and did something she had never done before. She searched for Theodore Callahan, not the janitor, the man he used to be. The results filled her screen. Academic papers, conference presentations, award nominations, article after article about a brilliant young acoustic engineer who was revolutionizing the field of hearing assistance for children. Photos of Theo at podiums, accepting honors, shaking hands with dignitaries. And always beside him a woman. Dark curls, bright smile, eyes that sparkled with intelligence and warmth. Dr. Lillian Callahan. Evelyn read about her too. She learned about the research they had conducted together, the devices they had developed, the children they had helped. She read about their dream of creating technology that would let deaf children feel music sense, speech connect to the world of sound through vibration and touch. She read about the accident, the drunk driver, the rainy night, the collision that killed Lillian instantly and left Theo with injuries that healed, but scars that never would. She read about his disappearance from the field, the papers that went unfinished, the research that was abandoned, the brilliant career that simply stopped as if someone had pressed pause and never pressed play again. And she understood. Theo was not helping Miles because she had hired him. He was helping Miles because Miles was the continuation of everything he and Lillian had worked for. Every session with the boy was a conversation with his dead wife. Every breakthrough was a promise kept. He was finishing their dream. Through her son, Evelyn closed her laptop and sat in the darkness for a long time. She thought about loss, about grief, about the ways people find to keep going when everything they love has been taken from them. She thought about her own walls, her own defenses, the fortress she had built to protect herself from a world that had hurt her. And she thought about the man who had lost more than she had, but still found the strength to reach out, to help, to care. A door she had kept locked for years began to open. She was not ready to walk through it. Not yet. But she could see what was on the other side. The therapy sessions continued through the winter. Miles progressed slowly with setbacks and breakthroughs in equal measure. He learned to tolerate everyday sounds. He developed coping strategies for when the world became too loud. He practiced his vowels and consonants with increasing precision. And Evelyn changed too. She left work earlier. She attended every session. She learned the techniques Theo was using so she could practice with Miles at home. She stopped being a CEO who happened to have a son and became a mother who happened to run a company. Her board noticed the shift. Pemberton complained that she was losing focus, that the company was suffering, that her personal life was interfering with her professional responsibilities. Evelyn told him that if he had a problem with her leadership, he was welcome to resign. He did not resign, but the tension remained. Spring arrived slowly, pushing winter aside with tentative warmth and hesitant sunshine. And on a clear April evening, something happened that changed everything. Evelyn had stayed late at the office finishing quarterly reports. When she finally made it to the therapy room, the session was already over. But she could hear voices inside. Theo's voice, and someone else. She paused outside the door listening. Rosalie was there asking her father why he never talked about her mother, why there were no pictures of her at home, why he got sad sometimes when he thought no one was looking. Evelyn knew she should walk away. This was not her conversation, not her family, not her grief, but she stayed. Theo's response was quiet, halting, the voice of a man who had carried something alone for too long. Talking about your mom hurts, he said. The hurt never goes away. Sometimes the memories are so beautiful that they feel like knives. He paused. But she wouldn't want me to hide. She wouldn't want you to grow up without knowing her. She would want me to remember even when it's painful. So you're going to try, Rosalie asked. I'm going to try. I'll tell you stories. I'll show you pictures. I'll let her live in our conversations even though she can't live in our home. Do you think she can see us from heaven? Theo's voice broke. I hope so. I believe so. I think every time you're kind to someone, every time you help without being asked, every time you make a friend out of a stranger, she's watching. He gathered himself. And she's proud. Evelyn stepped back from the door. Her face was wet. She had not noticed the tears. She left without announcing herself, walking through the empty corridors of her company, past the cleaning crews, and the security guards, and all the invisible people who kept her empire running. She thought about Theo, about the man he had been and the man he was now, about the weight he carried and the grace with which he carried it, about the way he looked at her son with patience and hope and something that looked almost like love. and she admitted to herself what she had been trying to deny for months. She was falling for him, not the janitor, not the acoustic engineer, but the man who had lost everything and still found the strength to help a stranger. The man who was teaching her son to speak. The man who was teaching her to feel. The realization terrified her because Evelyn Blackwood did not fall. She did not lose control. She did not allow herself vulnerabilities that could be exploited. But some walls are not meant to stand forever, and some fortresses are better as homes. She went back to the therapy room the next day after the session when she knew Theo would be cleaning up. He looked up when she entered. Something passed between them. Recognition, understanding, the acknowledgement of feelings neither had spoken aloud. "I read about your wife," Evelyn said quietly. "She sounds remarkable." Theo went very still. "She was." Evelyn hesitated, then she continued. "What you're doing for Miles, it's not just therapy. I can see that you're continuing something, finishing something. My son is part of something bigger than any of us." Theo looked at her for a long moment. "How do you know?" "I recognize the look in your eyes. It's the same look I have when I'm working on something that matters, something that goes beyond profit and success, something that touches the soul." Theo turned away facing the window. Lillian believed sound could heal, not just ears but hearts, not just bodies but spirits. She believed helping children find their voices was sacred work. He was quiet for a moment. "I forgot that after she died. I buried it with her. But then I met Miles." He turned to face her again. "Everything came back. Your son gave me something, a reason to remember instead of forget, a purpose that goes beyond survival." Evelyn stepped closer. "Miles isn't the only one who's been changed by you." Their eyes met. The space between them hummed with possibility. Neither of them moved. Neither of them needed to. Some things do not require words. Some things are understood. And as the sun set over Manhattan, painting the therapy room in shades of gold and rose, two broken people stood in comfortable silence and allowed themselves for the first time in years to hope for something more. 6 months had passed since the day a janitor pulled a broken device from a boy's ear. 6 months of therapy sessions and breakthroughs in setbacks. 6 months of learning that sound was not the enemy. 6 months of a mother watching her son emerge from a prison she had not known existed. And Miles was speaking. Not fluently, not clearly. But words were forming now. Real words. Sounds that carried meaning. Syllables that connected him to a world he had been locked out of for most of his life. He could say water. He could say book. He could say please and thank you and yes and no. Simple words. Ordinary words. Words that meant everything. Evelyn had changed too. The Ice Queen was melting. Her employees noticed it first. The way she smiled in meetings. The way she asked about their families. The way she left the office before dark. Something that had never happened in the 12 years since she founded the company. She laughed now. Real laughter, not the polished chuckle she deployed at board meetings and charity galas. The kind of laughter that came from somewhere deep, somewhere she had forgotten existed. And she had started inviting people to her home. Not investors, not clients, not the carefully curated social connections that served her professional ambitions. Just Theo and Rosalie. For pizza, for movies, for evenings that stretched into nights with children sprawled on the floor, playing board games while two adults sat on the couch and talked about everything except work. The first time it happened, Evelyn had been nervous. She had not entertained guests in her penthouse since the divorce. The space had become a refuge, a fortress within her fortress where she and Miles existed in their private bubble of silence and survival. But Rosalie had bounded through the door like a small tornado of curls and energy, immediately declaring that the apartment was fancy, but needed more color. Miles had taken her hand and led her to his room to show her his book collection. And suddenly the penthouse did not feel like a fortress anymore. It felt like a home. Theo had stood in her living room looking out at the Manhattan skyline, and she had seen something shift in his expression. "What are you thinking?" she asked. Lillian would have loved this view. She always talked about living somewhere she could see the whole city. She said it made her feel like anything was possible. Evelyn had not known what to say, so she simply stood beside him, watching the lights of the city flicker like earthbound stars and let the silence speak for both of them. That night, after Theo and Rosalie had gone home, Miles had done something unexpected. He had walked up to his mother, placed his hand on her cheek, and made a sound. It was not a word, not yet, but it was intentional, deliberate, a vocalization that carried feeling even if it could not carry language. Evelyn understood. He was saying thank you for the pizza, for the friends, for the laughter that had filled their home for the first time in his memory. She had pulled him into her arms and held him until he squirmed away. And she had made a decision. The address led to a small house in Queens. It was nothing like Evelyn had expected. Peeling paint on the shutters, a lawn that needed mowing, a car in the driveway that had seen better decades. She sat in her town car for 10 minutes watching the house, trying to find the courage to go inside. Constance Whitfield lived here. The woman who had put a device in her son's ear. The woman who had stolen years of his life. The woman Evelyn had every right to destroy. Her lawyers had built a case. Negligence, reckless endangerment, civil liability that could take everything Constance owned and then some. The woman had acted without medical authorization, without proper training, without any understanding of the damage she was causing. Justice demanded consequences. But justice and healing were not always the same thing. Evelyn got out of the car. The woman who answered the door was nothing like she remembered. Constance Whitfield had aged dramatically. Her hair had gone completely white. Her shoulders hunched forward as if carrying an invisible weight. Her eyes, when they recognized Evelyn, filled with a terror that was almost painful to witness. She tried to close the door. Evelyn stopped her. "I'm not here for revenge." Constance stared at her, trembling. "I just want to understand." They sat in a small living room filled with photographs. Children Constance had cared for over the years. Families she had served. A lifetime of nurturing other people's sons and daughters. One photograph Evelyn noticed showed Miles as an infant. Constance saw her looking. The old woman began to cry. "I never meant to hurt him." Her voice was barely a whisper. "I read about the device in a magazine, an article about new technology that could help deaf babies develop hearing. I ordered it from a website that promised miracles." She wiped her eyes with trembling hands. "I believed I was helping. The doctors had given up on Miles. They said there was nothing to be done. But I couldn't accept that. I loved that boy. I thought if I could just give him a chance, just try something the doctors were too cautious to attempt, maybe it would work." Her voice broke. "I didn't know the device was faulty. I didn't know it would slip deeper into his ear canal. I didn't know it would cause him pain." She looked at Evelyn with eyes full of a decade's worth of guilt. "By the time I realized something was wrong, I was too afraid to say anything. Too afraid of losing my job. Too afraid of what you would do. Too afraid of the truth." She bent her head. "So I quit. Made up an excuse about a family emergency. I've spent years drowning in guilt. I pray for Miles every night. I light candles at church. I beg God to fix what I broke." She looked up, but I never had the courage to come forward. Evelyn sat in silence for a long moment. She thought about anger, about blame, about the satisfaction of making this woman pay for what she had done. And then she thought about Miles, about the sounds he was learning to make, about the laughter that filled their home now, about the future that was opening up before him like a door finally unlocked. The device was gone. The damage was being healed. The past could not be changed, but the future was not yet written. "I forgive you." Constance looked at her as if she had spoken in tongues. "What you did was wrong," Evelyn continued. "It was reckless and ignorant, and it cost my son years he will never get back. But I understand that you acted out of love, misguided love, foolish love, but love nonetheless." She stood. "I'm not going to press charges." Constance broke down completely. She fell to her knees in her own living room, sobbing, clutching at Evelyn's hands like a drowning woman reaching for shore. "I'm sorry," she kept saying. "I'm so sorry." A lifetime of guilt pouring out in 2 words. Evelyn helped her to her feet. "Sorry is enough. Now we both need to let it go. Miles is learning to speak. He has a chance now. Holding on to anger won't help him, and it won't help me either." She left the small house in Queens feeling lighter than she had in years. Forgiveness, she was learning, was not a gift you gave to others. It was a gift you gave to yourself. The breakthrough came on an ordinary Tuesday. There was nothing special about the day. No storms, no incidents, no dramatic circumstances. Just another therapy session, another hour of practice, another step in the long journey from silence to sound. Rosalie was there as she always was now. She had become as essential to Miles's progress as Theo himself. The two children had developed their own language, a mixture of signs and sounds and gestures that no one else quite understood. They were playing a game Rosalie had invented. She would make a sound and Miles would try to copy it. When he got it right, he earned a point. When he got it wrong, she would exaggerate the mouth movements until he understood. It was silly and chaotic and filled with laughter. And then Rosalie said a word, Mom. She was not talking to Miles. She was telling him about her own mother, about the photograph on her nightstand, about the stories her father had started telling her. But Miles heard the word, felt the word, watched her lips form it, and something clicked. He placed his hand on his own throat the way Theo had taught him. He felt the vibrations of his vocal cords. He shaped his lips the way Rosalie's had been shaped. And he spoke. Mom. The word came out imperfect, rough around the edges, more breath than voice, but it was unmistakable. Mom. Rosalie froze. Theo, who had been observing from across the room, stopped breathing. Miles did not notice their reactions. He was focused on the sensation in his throat, the vibration, the feeling of sound being created by his own body. He tried again. Mom. Clearer this time, stronger, a word he had never spoken in his entire life. Theo moved slowly, carefully, not wanting to startle the boy out of whatever spell had taken hold. He pressed the intercom button that connected to the observation room. Evelyn? His voice was barely steady. Come in, now. Evelyn had been watching through the glass. She had seen the whole thing, but she had not believed it. Not until she heard Theo's voice. Not until she walked through the door and saw her son's face. Miles looked up at his mother. His expression was strange, wondering, as if he had discovered something miraculous and was not sure whether to be proud or afraid. He placed his hand on his throat again. He shaped his lips, and he spoke directly to her. Mom. Evelyn's knees buckled. She caught herself on the doorframe, one hand reaching toward her son, as if afraid he might disappear. The words still echoed in the room. Mom. Real. Undeniable. Hers. All those years of silence. All those nights of wondering. All those prayers that seemed to go unanswered. And here it was. Mom. Simple. Ordinary. The most beautiful word in any language. Miles looked confused by her reaction. He did not understand why his mother was shaking, why her eyes were streaming, why she seemed both broken and healed at the same time. So he said it again. Mom. Evelyn crossed the room in 3 steps and dropped to her knees in front of him. She cupped his face in her hands, looking into his eyes, searching for the boy who had been lost in silence for so long. He was still there, but he was also something new. Someone who could speak, someone who could be heard, someone who could say the words she had waited his entire life to hear. Yes, she whispered, her voice cracking. Yes, baby, that's right. I'm your mom. I love you. I've always loved you. I will love you forever. Miles did not understand all the words, but he understood the feeling. He wrapped his small arms around his mother's neck, and he said the word again. Mom. Just because he could, just because the word was his now, just because years of silence had finally miraculously, impossibly ended. Theo turned away. He walked to the window and looked out at the city, giving them privacy, letting the moment belong to mother and son alone. Rosalie appeared beside him. She slipped her hand into his. Miles's mom is really happy, she observed. Theo nodded. He could not speak. Rosalie looked up at him with her mother's perceptive eyes. Are you crying, Daddy? Theo wiped his face with the back of his hand. It's just dust, he managed. Rosalie smiled. There's a lot of dust in this room. Then she leaned her head against his arm and watched the city with him, while behind them a mother held her son and listened to the words she had waited his entire life to hear. The center opened 6 months later. It occupied the entire 42nd floor of the Blackwood Dynamics Tower. State-of-the-art therapy rooms, research laboratories, a training facility for acoustic therapists from around the world, Everything Theo and Lillian had dreamed of made real by resources they could never have imagined. Evelyn had insisted on the name, the Lillian Callahan Center for Acoustic Therapy. Theo had resisted at first. It's too much. Lillian would have been embarrassed by such attention. Her memory doesn't need a building with her name on it. Evelyn had taken his hands in hers. Lillian's memory deserves exactly this. The work you started together is going to help hundreds of children. Thousands maybe. Children who will find their voices because of technology Lillian believed in before anyone else. She squeezed his hands. Her name should be on these walls, so that every child who walks through those doors will know where their second chance came from. Theo had not argued after that. The opening ceremony was small by Evelyn's standards. No press, no politicians, no society photographers jockeying for position. Just the staff of the center, a few carefully chosen donors, and the families of the first children who would receive treatment. Miles stood beside his mother on the small stage. He was 9 years old now. His speech had improved dramatically over the past months. He still relied on sign language for complex conversations, still struggled with certain sounds, still found crowds overwhelming without his noise-canceling headphones. But he could communicate, he could connect, he could be heard. Evelyn spoke first. She told the assembled guests about her son, about the device, about the janitor who had seen what everyone else missed, about the journey from silence to sound that had changed both of their lives. She did not mention her own transformation, but everyone who knew her could see it. The Ice Queen had melted. In her place stood a woman who smiled easily, who laughed often, who looked at the janitor turned researcher with something that went far beyond professional respect. Then Miles stepped forward. He had prepared remarks, written them himself with help from Rosalie, practiced them until the words felt natural in his mouth. He spoke slowly, carefully, each word a small victory. My name is Miles. I used to live in silence. I thought silence was just how my life would be. He looked at Theo. Then someone heard me, even when I couldn't speak, even when I had no voice. Someone listened. He turned back to the audience. That's what this place will do for other kids. It will listen, it will hear, it will help them find the sounds inside them. He paused. My mom told me this center is named after someone special. Someone who believed that sound isn't just something you hear. It's something you feel. Something that lives in your bones and your heart. He looked at Theo again. I never met her, but I think she must have been really smart and really kind and really important. His voice grew stronger. I'm glad her name will be on the building, so everyone will remember her. Theo could not hold back the tears anymore. He did not even try. Lillian, after all these years, her dream was alive. Her work was continuing. Her name would be spoken by children who would never know her face but would carry her legacy in their voices. It was more than he had ever dared to hope for. It was everything. The conversation happened on a rainy evening in September. Theo was tucking Rosalie into bed, the same ritual they had performed every night for 7 years. Story first, then prayers, then the kiss on the forehead that meant everything was safe and tomorrow would come. But tonight Rosalie had a question. Daddy, do you like Miss Evelyn? Theo hesitated. What do you mean? Rosalie rolled her eyes with the exasperation only a 7-year-old could muster. I mean like. The way Tommy Frazier likes Madison at school. The way people in movies look at each other before they kiss. Theo did not know what to say. Rosalie continued, I've seen the way you look at her, the way you smile when she walks into a room, the way your voice changes when you talk to her. She reached up and touched his face. It's okay if you like her, Daddy. Mom would be happy. Theo's breath caught. How do you know that? Rosalie's eyes were ancient in her young face. Mom told me once, before she died, she said if anything ever happened to her, she wanted you to be happy. She said love doesn't run out just because someone dies. It grows bigger to make room for more. Theo stared at his daughter. These were not the words of a 7-year-old. These were Lillian's words, spoken years ago, remembered by a child who had been barely old enough to understand. Rosalie smiled. I think Miss Evelyn makes you happy, and Miles could be my brother. We could all be a family. She snuggled deeper into her pillow. Mom would like that. Theo kissed his daughter's forehead. You're the wisest person I know. I know, she said. Then she closed her eyes and fell asleep, leaving her father to sit in the darkness with tears on his face and hope in his heart. Lillian, his wife, his partner, his greatest love, she was gone. She would always be gone, but she had left him one final gift: permission. Permission to live, permission to love, permission to stop surviving and start thriving again. He looked at the photograph on Rosalie's nightstand. Lillian smiled back at him, frozen in time, forever young. "I miss you," he whispered. "I'll always miss you." He touched the frame gently. "But I'm ready now, ready to step forward, ready to let my heart beat for someone new, ready to build the family Rosalie deserves." He paused. "The family you would have wanted for us." The wedding was held in December, 1 year to the day after the center opened, 1 year after Miles had spoken his mother's name for the first time, 1 year of healing and growing and learning that broken things could be mended. The courtyard behind the Blackwood Tower had been transformed. White lights strung through bare trees, chairs arranged in neat rows, a simple arch decorated with winter flowers. Snow had begun to fall an hour before the ceremony, soft flakes that caught the light and sparkled like diamonds falling from heaven. Evelyn had wanted something small, intimate, no press, no fanfare, just the people who mattered. She wore a simple white dress, no designer, no label, just something beautiful that made her feel like herself. Theo wore a dark suit that Rosalie had helped him pick out after rejecting 17 other options. The guests were few: close friends, a handful of family members, the staff of the center who had become like family themselves. Miles and Rosalie stood at the front, best man and flower girl, partners in mischief, soon to be brother and sister. The officiant spoke words about love and commitment and second chances, but the words that mattered came later. After the vows, after the rings, after the kiss that sealed two broken families into one. Miles tugged on Theo's sleeve. "I want to say something," he whispered. Theo looked at Evelyn. She nodded. Miles stepped forward. He was nervous. Anyone could see it in the way his hands trembled, in the way he took a deep breath before beginning. But his voice was clear. "I lived in silence for a long time. Not because I wanted to, but because I couldn't do anything else." He looked at Theo. "Then Dad found me." The words settled between them like something sacred. Dad. Not Theo, not Mr. Callahan. Dad. Theo went very still. Miles continued. "Dad heard me even when I had no voice. He taught me that sound isn't just noise. It's connection. It's love." He looked at his mother. "Thank you for being my voice until I found my own." He looked at Rosalie. "Thank you for being my friend when nobody else understood." He looked at Theo again. "Thank you for being my dad." Then Miles did something no one expected. He walked to the photograph that Evelyn had placed on a small table near the arch. Lillian's photograph, brought here so she could be part of this day. Miles touched the frame gently. "I never met you," he said quietly, "but I know you were important. I know you helped create the things that helped me speak." He straightened. "Thank you. I'll try to make you proud." Theo broke. Completely. Utterly. He fell to his knees in front of his new son and pulled him into an embrace that said everything words could not. Evelyn knelt beside them. Rosalie joined the huddle. 4 people. 2 families. 1 future. The guests watched in tearful silence as the snow fell around them and something beautiful was born from the ashes of grief. Later, as the celebration wound down and the city lights began to flicker through the falling snow, Theo found himself standing alone at the window. The others were inside, warm, happy, full of food and wine and the exhausted joy that follows momentous occasions. But he needed a moment, just a moment, to process everything that had changed. 1 year ago, he had been invisible, a janitor pushing a cart through corridors, hiding from a world that reminded him of everything he had lost. Now he was a father again, a husband again, a man with purpose and meaning, and a future worth fighting for. He felt a presence beside him, not Evelyn, not the children, something else, something that might have been imagination, or might have been something more, a warmth, a whisper, a feeling like being wrapped in arms he would never hold again. Lillian. He did not question it, he simply stood in the presence and let it fill him. And in his heart he heard her voice, the the voice he had missed for 10 years, the voice he would miss for the rest of his life. "I'm proud of you," she said. "I love you. I love Rosalie. I love Evelyn and Miles too, because they're yours now. And everything you love, I love. Be happy. You deserve it. Goodbye." But not really. Not ever. Because love does not end when someone dies. It just changes. It becomes something you carry instead of something you hold. Something that lives in memory instead of in arms. Something eternal. Theo whispered goodbye into the snow, and he felt her go. Not completely, not forever. Just back to wherever she watched from, wherever she waited, wherever she would be until he saw her again. The door opened behind him. Small footsteps approached. Miles appeared at his side, breath fogging in the cold air. "What are you doing, Dad? Dad?" The words still made Theo's heart stutter. "Just thinking." Miles nodded seriously. "Thinking is good." Then he reached up and took Theo's hand. He tugged. "Mom and Rosalie are waiting. They have cake. Rosalie's going to eat all of it if we don't hurry." Theo laughed, a real laugh, the kind that comes from somewhere deep, the kind he had thought he would never feel again. He let his son lead him back inside, back to warmth, back to family, back to the life he had thought was over. Evelyn looked up when they entered. She smiled. And in that smile, Theo saw everything. The future they would build together, the children they would raise, the challenges they would face and overcome, the love that had found them when neither was looking for it. He crossed the room and pulled her into his arms. "I love you." Simple words, ordinary words, words that meant everything. "I love you too," she said. Rosalie made a gagging noise. Miles giggled. And in a penthouse above Manhattan, while snow fell like grace on a city of millions, a family stood together and let the moment be enough. Outside, the world continued. Traffic moved through streets made white by winter. People hurried home to their own families, their own stories, their own struggles and triumphs. But in this room, time had stopped. Four people, two children who had found each other across a crowded lobby. Two adults who had found each other across oceans of grief. Broken things made whole, silent voices given sound, lost souls finally home. Miles looked at his mother, at his father, at his sister, his family, and he spoke. Not because anyone asked him to, not because he was practicing or performing or proving anything, just because he could. Just because the words were his now. Just because years of silence had taught him that words were precious and should never be wasted. "I love you." 3 words, spoken clearly, heard by everyone. Evelyn's eyes glistened with fresh tears. Theo pulled them all closer. Rosalie declared that this family was the best family ever. And outside the window, the snow continued to fall, covering the city in white, making everything clean, making everything new, making room for tomorrow.